Hello, everyone, and welcome to Silver Streams, the weekly podcast from the AFI Silver Theater and Cultural Center's programming team. I'm Todd Hitchcock, AFI Silver's Director of Programming.
I'm Abby Algar, Associate Film Programmer.
And I'm Ben Delgado, the Assistant Film Programmer.
And today we're going to discuss the latest offerings in AFI Silver's virtual screening room, as well as recommending some other titles to view at home.
So new in the virtual screening room this week, we have Shoplifters of the World, a drama that unfolds over the course of one night in 1987 as four friends are reeling from the sudden dissolution of iconic British band, The Smiths. We have LEAF.on, a coming-of-age drama about two best friends growing up in a Quebec Innu community. And this one's based on the acclaimed novel of the same name by First Nation Canadian author Naomi Fontaine. And then we have Francesco, which is the latest documentary from Oscar-nominated director and producer Evgeny Abnevsky, which examines the work of Pope Francis and his responses to some of the most pressing issues of the 21st century.
This week, we're going to discuss all of the new films premiering in AFI Silver's virtual screening room, and also briefly recap some of our most popular titles that opened in previous weeks and are also currently available to screen there. We also have a few special announcements about upcoming festivals and events to share with you, and we'll close out with our Programmer's Picks section, where we discuss other ideas for films to watch at home. And please check the episode description if you'd like to scroll ahead to any particular section. You'll find kind of a table of contents and time codes for that there. This is episode 39 of Silver Streams. We began the podcast approximately 1 year ago, back in April of 2020, shortly after we closed the doors to the AFI Silver Theater and launched our virtual cinema program. And we'd like to thank everyone out there who has listened to the podcast in this nearly 1 year's time. It's been, it's been an experience. It's been an educational experience for us putting together the podcast and over this time. And I hope getting better as we've gone along. And it's been wonderful to see the numbers from everyone out there who has been listening, including many people who have been listening from other countries outside of the U.S. We now have had listeners in over 30 countries from around the world, and that's just been wonderful to see. So again, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening to the Silver Streams podcast, and also a big thank you to everyone out there for screening films at home during this time of lockdown from our virtual screening room. By screening these films at home, you are supporting AFI Silver Theater. We receive a portion of the proceeds for every virtual cinema transaction that you make. So by screening at home, you are supporting our theater during our extended physical closure. Thank you all for supporting the Silver during these challenging times. And a reminder, you can find all of the titles that we are currently offering to screen at home on our website at afi.com/silver. And if you ever have any feedback or questions, you can email us at silverinfo@afi.com.
You can find the podcast each Friday posted on our website at afi.com/silver, in our Friday e-blast, and across our social media channels. And we are in all the places where you usually find your podcasts.
And as I remind you every week, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button in your podcast app of choice, or feel free to give us a rating while you're giving a subscribe to the show. That helps a lot. And of course, please tell your friends, tell your family, post it on social media, and spread the word about Silver Streams.
And as always, a really, really big thank you to everyone who streamed something from our virtual screening room this past week and weekend. Our top film over the weekend was Quo Vadis Aida, which is the 2021 Oscar selection from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and now nominee for Best International Feature Film. And this is a really powerful film about a translator working in a UN camp in Bosnia in the days and hours leading up to the 1995 Srebrenica massacre. And as we all said last week, this was a unanimous favorite of ours from last year's virtual Toronto International Film Festival. And we are all really, really happy to see it getting the recognition it deserves. And we're really happy to be able to spotlight it in the virtual screening room. And even more happy that so many people are checking it out. So good on you. And then on the topic of Oscar-nominated films in the virtual screening room, we also have Danish director Thomas Vinterberg's Another Round, which is nominated for Best Director and Best International Feature Film. Also winner of our Audience Award at last year's AFI EU Film Showcase, so his Oscar nominations are in good company. The film stars Danish superstar Mads Mikkelsen, who in my opinion should have been nominated for an acting Oscar for this role, but we won't go into that. And he plays a middle-aged, disillusioned high school teacher who sets out with his colleagues to test the theory that being slightly drunk all the time is really the optimal way to live. Well, needless to say, this theory has a few problems, and the film really explores these in some very darkly comedic ways. And we also have Romania's Oscar selection and now nominee for both Best Documentary and Best International Feature, Collective. And this is an investigative documentary that plays almost like a thriller and that chronicles the uncovering of corruption and failures within Romania's healthcare system. And then lastly, we have Lee Isaac Chung's multi-award-winning Minari, starring Stephen Yeun, which has been extended in our virtual screening room again through March 28th, and which is nominated for no less than 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. And then if you're looking to catch up with even more Oscar viewing before the awards on April 25th, then just a quick heads up that starting April 2nd, we're going to be offering the Oscar-nominated short films in the virtual screening room. We have a program for each of the 3 categories: animated, live action, documentary. And this is a really great chance to make a very informed prediction about the winners and get the edge on your Oscar pool. I have to say that I always do very well in our Oscar pool at the office, but the area that I fall down on often is shorts. So this year I will be watching all of them. And then Todd and Ben, watch out because I will be winning our Oscar pool.
Wow. Game on.
Ready.
Clearly.
And as always, we have quite a few docs in the screening room that people are checking out. 17 Blocks continues to lead the pack for the documentaries. It's a potent documentary that illuminates our nation's ongoing crisis through one DC family's deeply personal saga and filmed over 2 decades. A really great documentary. I'm very happy people are seeing that one in the virtual screening room. And the film that just opened last week, Wojnarowicz, that is a fiery and urgent documentary about a downtown New York artist, writer, photographer, and AIDS activist, David Wojnarowicz. And Stray, the new dog documentary, is holding in strong as well. This film looks at human civilization as seen through the eyes of 3 stray dogs on the streets of Istanbul. And the last 2 films rounding out the top 5 documentaries in our virtual screening room are Coup 53, which has been one of our longest running films in the virtual screening room. It left and then came back and is still doing very well. It tells the story of the shocking secrets found while investigating the 1953 coup in Iran. And lastly, Gustav Stickley, American Craftsman, chronicling the rise, fall, and resurrection of the father of American arts and crafts, the arts and crafts movement, that is Gustav Stickley.
Also among the top performers in our virtual screening room last week were the French comedy Perfumes, starring Emmanuel Devaux and Gregory Montel. Also, Rose Plays Julie, a very twisty psychological thriller from the Irish filmmaking team of Joe Lawler and Christine Malloy. And that film stars Anne Skelly, Orla Brady, and Aidan Gillen, and all 3 are excellent in their roles. Still holding strong is The Good Traitor, and this is the story of based on a true story of the Danish ambassador to the United States in 1940, Henrik Kaufman, who's played here by actor Ulrich Thompson. And Kaufman used all of his cunning and connections, social connections included, to resist Hitler and the Nazi government after his country had surrendered and leaving him somewhat marooned in Washington, D.C. during the early days of World War II. And also The Fever, a drama about a mysterious illness in Brazil. And this is the debut fiction feature from artist and documentarian Maya Deren, and also a returnee to our virtual screening room after debuting in our Latin American Film Festival last year.
And I can't believe that it's just a week away now, but we are really excited to be getting ready for this year's all virtual New African Film Festival, which is going to open on April 1st and run through April 18th. This is going to be the 17th edition of the festival. And I'm sure many of you remember that the 16th edition of the festival was basically the last kind of big program that we were able to have in person in the theater before we closed our doors last year. And we actually had to close a few days before it was set to end, in fact. So we're really happy that we were able to continue with this year's festival, even if it's virtual. We're forging ahead. We've got a great lineup. We're opening with Lesotho filmmaker Lamahang Jeremiah Mosese's multi-award-winning drama, This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection, which won the World Cinema Dramatics Special Jury Award at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, and in fact was the first film from Lesotho to be submitted to the Academy Awards. And actually, we had Mosese's previous film, Mother, I'm Suffocating, This Is My Last Film About You, in last year's lineup, and we were able to show it. So we're very happy to have him return virtually with this follow-up, and we will have a Q&A with him following the film, so don't miss that. So including our opening selection, this year's festival includes 33 films from 26 countries. We have 6 submissions for the Academy Award for Best International Feature. And then we close the festival with a new 2K restoration of Tunisian director Farid Boughadir's landmark survey of African cinema, Camera d'Afrique, which was actually originally slated to close the 2020 edition of the festival, which of course we unfortunately weren't able to do. And so we're really happy to come full circle and to finally show the film virtually as our closing selection. And we will have a Q&A with filmmaker Farid Boughadir himself. So there's lots and lots to enjoy. It's just $125 or $110 if you're an AFI member for a pass to access everything in the lineup. So if you are planning to check out a few of these films, it's a great way to save some money with a pass and see a bunch of really excellent films and support some African filmmakers who are forging their path in the world.
And before you start viewing the New African Film Festival, we are happy to announce a new series that we're partnering with the Spain Arts and Culture, Spanish Cinema Now Plus, which has just kicked off today. If you're listening to the podcast, the day it releases, with Rodrigo Sorogoyen's film Madre. This series leads up to our Spanish Cinema Now Festival in June, which is also co-presented by Spain Arts and Culture. Both the Spanish Cinema Now Plus series and Spanish Cinema Now as a whole are a showcase of outstanding new films that reflect the breadth and styles of talents at work in Spain today. As I mentioned, we've now opened with the slow burn thriller about a mother grappling with the loss of her son in Madre. And that one will be in the virtual screening room up until Fire Will Come, which opens on April 23rd. So you have till April 22nd to see Madre. Fire Will Come is Oliver Lax's powerful third feature about an arsonist in rural Galicia who returns home to live with his mother after getting out of prison. A beautiful movie. And finally, we'll close out this brief series with A Thief's Daughter, which will be available from May 14th through the 30th. And it's an award-winning directorial debut from writer-director Elaine Funes, a really searing working-class drama with a great performance from Greta Fernandez as Sarah, a 22-year-old new mother juggling a minimum wage job, actually multiple minimum wage jobs, while fighting for custody of her half-brother in order to keep him out of foster care.
Also currently on offer on our virtual screening room in terms of festival presentations, we have 2 films we are co-presenting with the Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital. And those 2 films are Stray, the Turkish dog doc that Ben mentioned briefly a moment ago, and Gunda. And Gunda is this really wonderful, immersive cinema verite documentary where the audience follows the life of a mother pig on a farm and her litter of piglets and the other farm animals around her. And it really just kind of immerses you into seeing the world through the eyes of this creature and her neighbors among the chickens and other animals in the barnyard around her. A real standout on the festival circuit, and a film that will eventually be in release. But right now, it is. If you want to see it right now, you can see it through us and the Environmental Film Festival. And then, in the case of Stray, there's also a unique Q&A featured on that, as presented by the Environmental Film Festival with the filmmaker. And we're especially happy to be partnering with the festival once again, as we have in past years. But unfortunately, last year, their festival lineup was a casualty during the very early weeks of the pandemic breaking out. And very sadly, they had to back out. So it's especially good to see them coming back this year with a tremendous selection of films. And you can see the full lineup on their website at dceff.org. But in the case of the two that we're co-presenting, Gunda and Stray, you can access those titles through our website, afi.com/silver, which will connect you over to theirs. And then we also inaugurated a new screening series just this past week, and that is the DC Labor Film Fest Spring Screening Series. So this is another one of the local film festivals that we have partnered with over the years, and in this case, something like 12 or 13 years now. And in May, look for an online edition of this year's DC Labor Film Fest. But in anticipation of that and preparation, we just began this weekly screening series. So films that we're featuring in our screening room already, but every Wednesday over the next several weeks, we'll be featuring them along with a discussion component hosted by, well, a number of different people, including some local academics who specialize in labor history. So we just kicked it off with Dear Comrades this week, and next week, Wednesday, March 31st, look for the film Identifying Features. And that one will feature a post-screening discussion with Jose Vargas from the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, as well as Andrea Arenas from that same organization. And then on Wednesday, April 7, look for the very clever sci-fi kind of future work dystopia that is the film Lapsus. And that one is going to feature a discussion with Katie Parker from the Nonprofit Professional Employees Union, as well as Margaret Poydock from the EPI. And that's going to be moderated by Sarah Jaffe, who is a labor journalist and author of the book Work Won't Love You Back: How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. And then on Wednesday, April 14th, we have a screening of Martin Eden. And this is the one that we're all super excited about, because the post-screening conversation for this one is going to be conducted with filmmaker and novelist John Sayles. John Sayles, of course, very well known for films ranging from The Return of the Secaucus 7 to 8 Men Out to Lone Star and many more. And I think hearing what he has to say about Martin Eden, which has also been a real standout in release online and virtual cinema presentations, has been our biggest hit to date, and one that people really went for in a big way. So I'm really looking forward to what he's going to have to say about that particular film and how it relates to themes of labor and capital and society and all of that. And I know he's particularly interested in the connections to the original Jack London novel as well. And again, for all of the films involved in that series, you can get the full details on our website, and then look for the new DC Labor Film Festival coming in May. Okay, so that's what we have coming up at the moment for special events and festivals. Now, here are the new films debuting in our virtual screening room this week. So first up in our virtual screening room this week is Shoplifters of the World. And this film centers on an incident that took place in 1987 in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, where a fan of the British pop band The Smiths, distraught at news of their breakup, took a local radio DJ hostage at gunpoint and demanded he played nothing but the Smiths that night. The film begins with text indicating that it is based on true intentions, not based on true events quite, as the story appears to be more urban legend than fact-based. And arriving now, as it does, following yet another mass shooting in the state of Colorado, this problematic plot element could be jarring for some. But the larger story writer-director Stephen Kijak constructs around this inciting incident is quite wonderful. Kind of a revisionist 80s teen coming-of-age comedy with a 2021 sensibility. A group of friends dream of life beyond their high school and dreary hometown. Smith's obsessive Cleo, played by Helena Howard from Madeline's Madeline, who dreams of moving to Paris. Sheila, played by Elena Kampouris, is very, very ready to consummate her relationship with Patrick, played by James Blore, but he has ardently embraced his hero and Smith's frontman Morrissey's claim of celibacy. And the good-natured Billy, played by Nick Krause, who has signed up for the army for reasons he can't quite explain to himself or anyone else. On the same night that this group of moody misfits drown their sorrows over the demise of their beloved pop band during a wild night of partying and self-discovery, a night that begins at a raucous house party, the kind that you only see in teen movies, proceeding to a semi-underground gay disco, and ultimately ends up at the local radio station. The same radio station where Cleo's would-be suitor Dean, played by Eller Coltrane, that would be the boy from Richard Linklater's Boyhood, infiltrates the local radio station and takes DJ Full Metal Mickey hostage, forcing him to ditch his 80s hair metal and play only the best of the Smiths. And this set list of songs becomes the soundtrack for the four friends listening along throughout the night, as well as for the viewers who hear some 20 Smiths tracks, including How Soon Is Now, Sheila Take a Bow, The Queen is Dead, Panic, Oscillate Wildly, There Is a Light That Never Goes Out, Death of a Disco Dancer, and of course, Shoplifters of the World Unite. DJ Full Metal Mickey is played by Joe Manganiello, who is also a producer on the film, and he is very good in the role of a true music fan who turns out to be much more thoughtful and open-minded than his and Dean's initial scenes together would suggest. The young cast are terrific, and the film also features appearances from Reno 911's Thomas Lennon and Imani Lewis. Director Stephen Kijak made a name for himself with a number of excellent music-related documentaries, including Scott Walker, 30th Century Man, Jocko, about bassist Jaco Pastorius, and Stones in Exile, about the recording of the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. I think Kijak makes a convincing and winning transition here to feature narrative filmmaking, and I hope we'll see him continue in that vein. I really enjoyed this film, and I hope that you will too. So for all of you fans of 80s teen comedies and indie music, definitely check out Shoplifters of the World this week.
Well, Todd, this one sounds pretty good. It sounds like something I'd be interested in for sure. And I think really you could have stopped at Helena Howard as far as I'm concerned. Madeline's Madeline was really good film, I thought, and her performance was a large part of that. I think this is the first time she's been in an actual film since then.
Yeah, she's really good. It may, in fact, be the first project that she's had, first feature film project that she's had since Madeline's Madeline, which I know you were a big fan of. I mean, she's definitely the lead here. She's really good. The cast around her are also very good, and I hopefully will be seeing them in future projects soon. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film, and I think other people will too. Even if you're not the biggest Smiths fan per se in the world, if you are, you have to see it. But I think there's a lot to appreciate comedically. Again, the really terrific young cast, and the way that the music is integrated into telling the story. It's just a lot of fun. So I hope people will check it out. So once again, that's Shoplifters of the World, and that is coming to us from RLJE Films and Variance Films.
Well, next up in the virtual screening room is KUESSIPAN, which is coming to us from our friends at Artmatan Films. So KUESSIPAN had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2019. And yes, that was the last time we were all physically at the festival, and it does feel like quite a while ago now. And the film then went on to receive multiple awards on the festival circuit, including Best Director prizes at the Windsor International Film Festival and Quebec City International Film Festival in Canada. And now, happily, the film is arriving in virtual cinemas in the US. Kuessipan is directed by Quebecois filmmaker Myriam Verow in her narrative feature debut, and it's based on the acclaimed semi-autobiographical novel of the same name by First Nation Canadian author Naomi Fontaine, who, by the way, also wrote with Myriam Verow the film's screenplay. And like Naomi Fontaine's novel, the film tells the story of two best friends growing up in an Innu community in northeastern Quebec. Miquan, played by Sharon Ishpatau Fontaine, who has a loving family life and ambitions of becoming a writer, and Shanice, who is played by Yami Gregoire, who has a more troubled family life, which unfortunately ends up extending into her adult relationships, as we say over the course of the film. And as children, the pair promise to stick together no matter what. And this is something captured in a beautiful prologue of the film that kind of cements the two girls' deep bond. But then as they approach 17 and looming adulthood, their friendship is put to the test when Miquan falls for a white classmate in a writing workshop that she's attending and starts dreaming of leaving the community to study elsewhere. And at the same time, Shanice is really struggling in an abusive relationship with the father of her young child and kind of feeling like Miquan is abandoning her for this new life that she wants. So on the one hand, this is a very universal story about friendship and coming of age and carving out one's own path in life that we've seen dealt with in countless films and novels. The story tackles themes of friendship and identity and love and heartbreak that we can all relate to on some level. And then on the other hand, this is also a very highly specific story set very tangibly within this Quebec Innu community, specifically the Uashat community in northeastern Quebec, where author Naomi Fontaine grew up, and told through an Indigenous lens that really relays both the beauty and the day-to-day realities of life for the Innu people who live in this community, which of course is not something that we get to see in cinema all that often, if at all. The loving depiction of this community is anchored by a stunning lead performance from first-time actress Sharon Ishpatau Fontaine, herself also from Uashat and also an aspiring director. And as an aspiring writer, Miquan Fontaine creates a really compelling, complex character. She's witty and stubborn. She's proud of her heritage. She's loyal to her family. She's very intelligent. But in some ways, she's still a naive, idealistic 16-year-old young woman. And I think it takes real skill to capture this kind of liminal period in life authentically and in a nuanced way. And Fontaine has done a really excellent job here. The word kueessipan of the book and film's title translates roughly as your turn in the Innu language. And it was chosen specifically to express the idea that this is the Innu people's turn to tell their own stories. And of course, this is significant because the stories of Indigenous people and specifically Indigenous women have a long history of not being told correctly, if at all. And I will mention that filmmaker Myriam Verow herself is not of Innu heritage. And of course, that's always something to bring up and to consider when an artist is taking on an Indigenous story without themselves being Indigenous or from the specific community that they're representing. There was actually a recent scandal in Canada around acclaimed Canadian filmmaker Michelle Latimer, who has tackled Indigenous stories throughout her career and then was recently accused of misrepresenting her Indigenous ancestry. And I think this highlights how sensitive this debate is, and particularly in the Canadian film industry, and rightly so, it is something that should be discussed. But I think in this case, with Myriam Verow being very transparent about her own heritage, and with much of the creative input on the film coming from author Naomi Fontaine and from the actors involved, who are all Innu and for the most part from the specific community in which the film is set and was shot, I do think that the idea that the Innu are telling their own story can be given credence here. And I think what the filmmaking and acting team have achieved here is a really beautiful story that responsibly represents a community that's long been underrepresented or misrepresented. And I also think this is absolutely a perfect film for Women's History Month. The narrative here really does revolve around its central female characters. It's a great film for teens. It's a great insight into a community, as I mentioned, that we don't see all that often in cinema. And more broadly, it is a really well-executed coming-of-age drama with excellent performances all around. So highly recommend Kuessipan from Artmatan Films.
Well, I'm glad to hear this is a good film. I'm really happy we're playing it. And I think you've seen this, I know I've seen this, that it feels like Canada does a better job in its First Peoples and its Indigenous representation in film. So it doesn't surprise me that this film is coming out of Canada. And the fact that it's so specific that you mentioned reminds me of Minari in that it's very specific to a culture, but that specificity makes it universal. So I feel like this story probably compares pretty favorably to that film as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't actually thought of that, but that is a very good comparison. You know, Miriam Verow and Naomi Fontaine do a really great job of building this world, and it feels very tangible and authentic. And then at the same time, as I mentioned, this is a story that could be taking place anywhere about young people growing up and having conflicts and resolving those and, you know, dealing with coming of age. So yeah, I think that's a really good comparison for sure. Okay, so that is Kuessipan coming to us from Artmatan Films.
Okay, so the final film opening this week in our virtual screening room is the latest from Oscar-nominated director and producer Evgeny Evnevsky, Francesco. The film is a globe-spanning look at a myriad of the most pressing issues of our times, as seen from the vantage point of the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis. Over the course of 3 years, a film crew followed the world leader and captured his responses to the climate crisis, to racial inequality, issues of immigration, to vast economic disparity around the world, LGBTQ issues, gender discrimination, the failures and triumphs of the church, past and present, and including the sexual abuses within the Catholic Church itself, among many other things. And rather than take a traditional biographic look at the life of Pope Francis, Evnevsky gives an intimate look at the Pope through interviews with his friends, colleagues, supporters, experts, and more, including his nephew, Jose Ignacio Bergoglio, the Pope Emeritus, Pope Benedict XVI, Juan Carlos Cruz, a victim of sexual assault himself and an activist for that community, and Sister Norma Pimentel, an advocate for refugees. And of course, the bulk of the documentary takes us along with the Pope as he addresses the people directly or in quiet reflection on the varied issues and his personal views on them, and how he's attempting to work toward a more equitable planet, both within and outside the church in these unprecedented and quite turbulent times. The documentary has traveled to a few film festivals, including most recently Doc NYC, and it's opening this week in our virtual screening room from our friends at Abramarama. Again, that's Francesco, the new documentary about Pope Francis.
So Ben, I have to ask the question. There was another documentary about Pope Francis just a couple of years back, Pope Francis, a Man of His Word, from Wim Wenders back in 2018. And I'm just curious, like, how would you describe this documentary, separately from that one?
Yeah, I think that documentary was much more about Pope Francis, the man himself. And this one really looks at all these different issues in the world today and takes us there with the camera, like takes us to countries throughout the world and looks at the people and the way the Pope interacts with them and addresses them and his personal views on those things rather than his history or the man himself. So it's a little bit of himself through these different issues, but it's more about the issues and his reaction to them than Pope Francis.
Well, for me, this is just reminding me how much I loved Italian director Paolo Sorrentino's The Young Pope, his TV series with Jude Law as a hot, quite immoral young pope. So probably the opposite of, of what you see in this film. And there's a follow-up series, The New Pope, starring John Malkovich as the Pope, which this is reminding me that I still have not watched. So thanks for that reminder.
It's all part of the extended Pope universe, Pope cinematic universe.
The Pope-averse.
Yeah.
Happy to remind you about the Pope-averse, and glad to use the term that you just coined. It's great. Again, this new documentary is Francesco. It's now available in a virtual screening room from our friends at Abramarama.
All right. So that's what's new this week in AFI Silver's virtual screening room. In addition to discussing the films we have available as virtual cinema, each week we also like to discuss some other ideas for films that you can view at home, this being our Programmer's Picks section. And today we're going to discuss a comedy released 50 years ago in 1971, a film that had a rocky path to completion and has been too little seen since its initial release, remaining a true cult classic for those who have sought it out and fallen for its quirky sensibility and offbeat rhythms. The film is A New Leaf, starring Walter Matthau and Elaine May. And May also wrote and directed the film, her debut as a filmmaker. Elaine May is a name revered in comedy and cineast circles for the 4 films she directed: A New Leaf, The Heartbreak Kid, Mikey and Nicky, and the infamous Ishtar, all of which we'll touch upon later, as well as her work as a screenwriter, sometimes credited, but often not, by her own choosing. But before May began work making films, she was a sensation as one half of the comedy duo Nichols and May, a stand-up and sketch comedy duo she formed with Mike Nichols in 1958. Yes, that Mike Nichols, the famous stage and screen director of films like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Graduate. The pair had worked together for several years in the mid-1950s as part of Chicago's Compass Players, a sketch comedy troupe that eventually morphed into Second City. Setting out on their own to New York City, they quickly graduated from downtown hipster cafe stages and nightclubs like the Village Vanguard and the Blue Angel, where they shared bills with fellow comedy trailblazers Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul, to television bookings on The Steve Allen Show, Jack Parr's Tonight Show, and Omnibus. In 1960, they began a stage show on Broadway that ran for nearly a year to sold-out shows, and recorded 3 comedy albums in the space of 3 years. Despite all of this success, they broke up the act in 1962, according to most accounts given at May's request. They were still super popular as a comedy act, fielding dozens of offers to work in television, including to become the stars of their own program, but ultimately, both Nichols and May wanted something different. And eventually, for both of them, that turned out to be working in Hollywood as filmmakers.
And of course, that would be 2 different paths completely for Mike Nichols and Elaine May. I think part of what makes Nichols and May, what made Nichols and May so popular, such a hit, such a sensation, was their great chemistry, on-stage chemistry, and playing off of each other. A bit of yin-yang sort of relationship, with Nichols being more uptight, more left-brain, and May being much more of a free spirit and embracing the improvisation that was the Compass Players. And of course, which we just mentioned, bloomed into Second City, one of the most famous improvisational groups in the country, if not the world. So that sort of yin-yang thing also led to Mike Nichols' own success in stage and screen. As Todd mentioned, the 2 disbanded in the early 60s and worked on their own projects. Nichols started off on stage directing Barefoot in the Park in 1963 on Broadway, and he continued directing for the stage, earning a Tony for both Love and The Odd Couple. By 1966, Nichols would make his film debut with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which of course adaptation of a play itself, and follow that up with The Graduate in 1967, where May has an uncredited role. Then Catch-22 in 1970 and Carnal Knowledge in 1971. Meanwhile, of course, May is working on her own projects, and after The Graduate, wouldn't collaborate with Nichols in film again until 1996, writing the script for The Birdcage with Nichols directing. And he would say of that collaboration that it was like coming home, like getting a piece of yourself back that you thought you lost. So clearly the two had a deep mutual admiration for one another, and they influenced each other greatly in their formative years, starting off in the 50s and working together later again in the 90s.
Well, that was Mike Nichols' career trajectory post Nichols and May, but I think it's fair to say that at the point in Elaine May's career when she starts working on A New Leaf in the late 1960s, having already established herself as this bona fide comedy star opposite Nichols and then as a playwright and an actress in her own right, May probably wasn't actively looking for her next move directly to be becoming a filmmaking triple threat. And also one of the first women, as sad as it is to say, to write, direct, and star in her own film. Nevertheless, though, this is exactly what May did do next with her directorial debut, A New Leaf, in 1971. So as Todd and Ben mentioned, the Nichols and May duo parted ways in 1961, after which May was really focused on writing, in particular on her work as a playwright, in addition to taking on several smaller roles as an actress. She wrote several plays during this time, including 1969's adaptation, which she also directed for its off-Broadway run and for which she won a Drama Desk Award. So in 1968, May wrote the screenplay for A New Leaf, basing it on Jack Ritchie's short story, The Green Heart, a story that May had reportedly read in an Alfred Hitchcock mystery magazine. She then sold the script to Paramount, not expecting to direct it or to star in it, but apparently her manager pushed for her to direct, telling Paramount that having a woman filmmaker would be a good selling point in this case. And the studio basically ended up telling her that she couldn't approve the director or the star for the project. By the way, Carol Channing was considered for the lead at one point, but that she could fill both of those roles herself for not much more money, actually, than she was being paid for the script anyway. And so this is how it came to be that Elaine May signed an almost unprecedented contract with Paramount to write, direct, and star in A New Leaf, becoming the first female director to have a deal like this with a Hollywood studio since Ida Lupino, by the way. And so here May was, having never directed a film before, preparing to execute an ostensibly mainstream rom-com for a major Hollywood studio. And guess what? Despite a plethora of troubles along the way, which I will get into in a second, May pulled it off, and she in fact knocked it out of the park. And by the way, she subsequently became only the fourth woman member of the Directors Guild of America since its founding in 1936. So if you want some women's history for Women's History Month, there you go, there's some right there. So A New Leaf stars Walter Matthau, who, by the way, referred to Elaine May as Mrs. Hitler on set. She was quite strict, I understand. And he plays Henry Graham, who's this rich cad, kind of a proto-Trading Places Louis Winthorpe III, who's burned through his trust fund and is left with, in his opinion, basically two options: either to commit suicide or to marry a rich, unsuspecting woman, murder her, and inherit her money. Choices. But anyway, this leads Henry to Henrietta Lowell, who's played by May. She's a naive, bumbling heiress and a brilliant botanist with absolutely no clue what she is about to get into. The pair fall in love, or at least Henrietta does, or seems to, and they get married, all while Henry is murderously conspiring to take Henrietta's money and run, except, surprise, by the end of the film, in true rom-com fashion, Henry's cruel heart has softened and he's genuinely fallen for Henrietta and her guileless, unsophisticated charms. Now, May's original script for A New Leaf was decidedly darker than this, although I will say the film in its final form is still kind of dark for a mainstream rom-com. And her interpretation stuck pretty closely to Jack Ritchie's original short story, in which Henry does, in fact, have to commit 2 murders along the way in order to shore up his position as Henrietta's heir. The story ends in the same way, with Henry opting not to murder Henrietta and instead accept his life with her. But in this version, it's framed much more as a man kind of accepting his punishment and his fate in exchange for maintaining his life of luxury, rather than as any change of heart or blossoming of emotion on his part. And Elaine May later said that her aim initially with A New Leaf was to do the first comedy in which somebody got away with murder. And it's in fact this version of the story that Elaine May shot starting in 1969 and then edited into the 3-hour-long cut of the film that she initially presented to Paramount, $2 million over budget and 40 days over schedule, by the way. Needless to say, Paramount was not convinced of the viability commercially of a 3-hour rom-com with 2 murders and no romance and a pretty cynical ending. And they promptly took the film away from May. They cut about 80 minutes of it and then released it in the form as we know it, which of course is wonderful. But equally, of course, I would kill to see the 3-hour director's cut. Elaine May was furious with Paramount, obviously, particularly since she actually did have final cut in her contract. And she subsequently sued the studio and actually attempted to have her writing and directing credits removed from the film. The studio heads counterclaimed a breach of contract on her part, and they reportedly asked to show the judge in the case their 102-minute cut of the film as evidence that they were indeed making the right call, which I guess, according to Hollywood mythology, ended up winning them the case. According to one of the producers, and I quote, "The lights went down and the judge sat there and he screamed and laughed, and the lights go up and he says, 'It's the funniest picture in years. You guys win.'" I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good story. So anyway, as much as I would love to see the 180-minute cut of A New Leaf, and I'm sure it would be equally hilarious, if not more so, what we ended up with still remains, 50 years later, one of the greatest romantic comedies in the history of American cinema. Thanks, of course, to the great rich physical comedy, to the incredible verbal humor, and to the wonderful characters, all of which I can only assume would have just multiplied with 80 minutes more of film, and all of which come from May's incredible skill as a writer, as a director, as an actress. And so here's one of my favorite bits, in my opinion, the most romantic, even if unintentionally so, moment in the film when Walter Matthau's Henry defends Elaine May's Henrietta against an uptight hostess who's very angry with her about an unfortunate tea spillage.
If your nerves aren't steady enough to hold a cup and saucer in your hand, then you shouldn't be drinking tea.
I would like to.
Once, yes, but twice in a row.
It's too much. Too much.
Madam. There you are, madam. Take your damn carpet to the cleaners and send the bill to me. Here you are. Come, Miss Laurel, I'm taking you home. Take your bag.
You son of a bitch.
You dare call me a son of a bitch? Madam, I have seen many examples of perversion in my time, but your erotic obsession with your carpet is probably the most grotesque and certainly the most boring I have ever encountered. You're more to be scorned than pitied. Good day, Mrs. Cunliffe.
So on the subject of Walter Matthau, I talked about Matthau way back on episode 3 of this podcast in connection with his roles in the mid-1970s films, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, and The Bad News Bears. And suffice it to say that all 3 of us, Abby, Ben, and myself, are big fans of Walter Matthau. And here in A New Leaf, he gets to show yet another aspect of what he can do as a comedic performer. Matthau had acted in television and films since the early 1950s, but he really came into his own starting in the late 1960s, in his late 40s and early 50s, when he graduated from kind of an all-purpose support player to the classic Matthau character we think of, middle-aged, put upon, but wily. The role that really helped transform Mathau into a leading player was the original 1965 stage production of The Odd Couple, where he played the sloppy but crafty Oscar Madison. Written by Neil Simon, the original stage production of that play was directed by Mike Nichols. Mathau reprised his stage role for the 1968 film version. Jack Lemmon replaced Art Carney as Felix Unger. And from this point on, Mathau enjoyed many of his greatest roles. And as the 60s turned into the 70s, he found projects and roles that he was right for, kind of a middle-aged rascal or refusenik with a degree of countercultural credibility. All of this coming during the era of the New Hollywood. And it was during this stretch that Mathau appeared in films like Charlie Varick, The Laughing Policeman, The Sunshine Boys, and Hopscotch, in addition to Pelham and the Bad News Bears, which I previously mentioned. All of this not to mention several films done for Billy Wilder, including Mathau winning the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for 1966, The Fortune Cookie. Mathau's role here as Henry Graham fits in some surprising ways. Henry is a fastidious, old money snob, the polar opposite of Oscar Madison, in his impeccably tailored suits, professionally decorated apartment, and clubman social scene. One could quibble about the casting not being a perfect match here, but Mathau impresses with his sardonic line deliveries and tetchy ire. And now, having seen A New Leaf several times, I've really come to love his performance here. Henry fancies himself a gentleman, and that all of his privileges of money, status, standing, and leisure are his unquestioned birthright. When the news comes that his lavish spending, well beyond the comfortable life his trust fund could have provided him, has ruined him, it simply does not compute, which May and Mathau follow into darkly hilarious places.
Well, we've already talked quite a bit about Elaine May as the writer and director of A New Leaf, but of course, I don't want to forget to also highlight her incredible performance as an actress here in what was essentially her first leading role in a film, and for which she would earn a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actress. So after parting ways with Mike Nichols in 1961, May had, as I mentioned, acted in several comedy films, including in Carl Reiner's Enter Laughing in 1967 and in Clive Donner's Love, also in 1967, in which she appeared alongside Jack Lemmon and also Peter Falk, who she would later direct in her 1976 gangster drama, Mikey and Nicky, more on that later. But these have been supporting roles. And here with A New Leaf, the film literally lives or dies on May's ability to be both convincing as a completely oblivious fool who's stupidly taken in by what to everyone else is Henry's pretty obvious gold-digging scheme, but at the same time really endear this character to the audience and ultimately make us root for her. She is both an irritating caricature and at the same time a very relatable and empathetic human being. And I think you can grasp all of that here in just one short scene in which Henrietta tells Henry about her illustrious career and her dreams as a botanist.
Tell me about yourself, Miss Lowell. Your work, your hopes, your dreams.
Well, I work as a teacher, and I also do field work and write monographs. On my last field trip, I identified and classified all the variety of ferns on Jolly Bogo. It was one of the longest monographs I've ever written.
I'd love to read it sometime.
My hope is to discover a new variety of fern that has never been described or classified. I don't know what my dream is. Do you think it could be the same as my hope? Well, at any rate, that is my work and my hope, except for my dreams, which I'm not certain of.
And besides the verbal comedy that May engages in as Henrietta, there's also the incredible physical, verging on slapstick comedy that her character gifts the film in all of Henrietta's sharply observed social awkwardness. Her clumsiness, her inability to eat anything without getting crumbs everywhere or spilling something runs throughout the film. And then, of course, there's also the incredible Grecian gown scene in which it takes her and Henry about 10 minutes to figure out which is the head hole and which is the armhole so that she can wear it properly in order to seduce them. And the great thing, as I mentioned about May's performance, is that she never lets Henrietta's foibles kind of turn her into this sweet, adorable thing to be pitied. Her character is actually a bit annoying in ways, and some of the film's humor, I think, comes from the fact that the audience at times realizes that we're kind of siding with Henry in his disdain for her. But then again, May simultaneously plays Henrietta as real, and she humanizes her. You know, maybe we don't sympathize with her, but we definitely empathize with her. I mean, who has not spilled tea onto someone's fancy carpet at a crowded house party, or realized just a bit too late that you're covered in crumbs after an important lunch meeting? May makes Henrietta believable, and that's what allows us to find her funny and makes us want her to survive Henry's schemes. And then there's also the kind of the lady doth protest too much potential, I think, in her performance. Maybe she knows exactly what she's doing. And in fact, she's the one that's luring Henry in to do her bidding, because, I mean, she actually ends up with a pretty sweet deal. She has a man who manages all her household affairs and her finances. He cooks for her. He makes her look presentable. He drives her around, and he leaves her free to work on her one true love, botany. And then, by the way, don't take May's acting chops from me. I'll quote Jack Lemmon from his time working with May on Love in 1967. He said, "She's the finest actress I've ever worked with. I think Elaine May is touched with genius. She approaches a scene like a director and a writer." So here with A New Leaf, you really do have the perfect confluence of May as writer, director, and actress. Sadly, one which has not repeated itself since, but, you know, Elaine May is still going strong, so we can hope.
And aside from those two great lead performances, there's also a nice stable of character actors and supporting roles here in A New Leaf, starting with, of course, George Rose as Harold the butler. I don't know if it's arguable or inarguable that he's the funniest supporting role, but I think it's inarguable that he's the largest supporting role. And he's really hilarious as Henry's butler, who advises him to marry once he finds out that he's run out of money. Rose was a British character actor who got his start on the stage in the 1940s, making his Broadway debut in 1946 in Hamlet, and then returning to the UK to work mostly in comedies, and later in the 50s, joining the Royal Shakespeare Company. Also in the 50s, he began a film career, most notably in The Good Die Young and A Night to Remember. And he continued to work steadily in film and TV up until his untimely death in 1988. Although he was relatively prolific and, of course, is amazing in this film, I think that performance, his butler performance here, is probably his best role, or at least the one he's most remembered for. And James Coco plays Uncle Harry here. Henry, confusing a little bit in terms of the character names, but also comes up as a plot point in the film. And the uncle that begrudgingly loans Henry $50,000 to be repaid within 6 weeks, and kind of sets the ticking clock for Henry in the film to exact his plan of marriage. So Coco is great in this brief appearance in the film. Actually has a couple good scenes. First as this opulent uncle refusing his nephew's request, and then finally capitulating to the assistants once he's agreed to some exorbitant terms. And then later on in the film, coming back very briefly for a phone call. But Coco had a similar start in his career as Rose, beginning in the theater in the 50s and going on to appear in films such as The Muppets Take Manhattan, Murder by Death, and most notably Men of La Mancha. And along with A New Leaf, all these films were in the 70s. So starting in the 50s, but really taking off in the 70s. And also, like Rose, an untimely death at the age of 56 in 1987. And then, of course, there's William Redfield as Beckett, Henry's attorney, who has a difficult time conveying to his client that he's broke in one of the most memorable scenes in the film, and his only real scene in the film.
Don't treat me as though I were a child, Mr. Beckett.
No, I'm not.
I am as aware of what it means to have no capital as you are.
Oh, good.
Now, what about this check?
Well, are you entirely sure that you really do understand what I mean by capital, Mr. Graham. You see, you've exhausted the capital. I can't cover the check because the check is for $6,000 and you don't have $6,000. In other words, you don't have $60.
Come to the point, Beckett.
The point, Mr. Graham, is that you don't have any money. The capital and the income are exhausted, and you no longer have any money. I wish there was some other way I could say it. How could I put it? That money, you have no capital, you have no income, no, it's only money. No, you have no money. There's no other way to put it, you see.
You mean I have no money?
Yes, that's what I mean. You have no money.
And like the other two actors I mentioned just a second ago, Redfield was a character actor who began his career on the stage in Broadway and appeared in some excellent films as well, including Shirley Clarke's The Connection, Fantastic Voyage, Death Wish, and I think the one he's probably most remembered for is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And sadly, once again, Redfield is yet another actor here connected to a new Leaf who had an untimely death, this time at the age of 49 in 1976.
Also terrific in supporting roles are Jack Weston as Henrietta's crooked estate attorney, Andy McPherson. Weston is very funny in this part, grasping, devious, self-pitying, and ridiculous. Not unlike Henry. And like Henry, he also makes a half-hearted attempt for Henrietta's attentions. Weston was a veteran character actor, and you might recall or recognize him from films like Wait Until Dark, The Thomas Crown Affair, Dirty Dancing, and also, once again for May, as Agent Marty Freed in Ishtar, and also Doris Roberts as Mrs. Traggart. And Roberts does a lot with a relatively small role here as the winking, chiseling housekeeper, Mrs. Traggart. Roberts, of course, will forever be remembered for playing Ray Romano's mom on Everybody Loves Raymond through the 2000s. So it's fun to see her here as her younger self in this role.
So despite Elaine May's misgivings about how the film would be received in the form that Paramount released it, 80 minutes shorter than the cut that she would have preferred, A New Leaf was a massive critical success. Gene Siskel put the film at number 2 on his list of the best films of 1971. And it also got a top 4-star rating from Roger Ebert, who went so far as to compare the film, and in particular the Grecian nightgown scene that I mentioned, to comedy Holy Grail, The Producers, writing, "As Henrietta struggles with the gown for about 2 minutes, you hear more laughter than I've heard in any theatre since The Producers," which is my yardstick for these matters. And while the film only did modestly at the box office on its initial release, it has really only grown in reputation and cult status since 1971, particularly among comedy buffs. And I think it absolutely prefigured and influeensed what we now think of as the modern, slightly jaded, off-kilter rom-com that we see in the work of comedy greats like Judd Apatow, Seth Rogen, Miranda July, even Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Michaela Cole, or even someone like director Amy Heckerling, who, by the way, credits May as being the one who kind of validated her own dreams of directing. So in addition to everything else, we can also thank Elaine May for Clueless, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and Fleabag. And then here's Phoebe Waller-Bridge in her dark rom-com series, Fleabag, which she, by the way, wrote, directed, and starred in. Very much, I think, showing off a comic sensibility very close to May's.
So why do you think your father suggested you come for counselling?
I think because my mother died and he can't talk about it. And my sister and I didn't speak for a year because she thinks I tried to sleep with her husband. And because I spent most of my adult life using sex to deflect from the screaming void inside my empty heart. I'm good at this.
So after her difficult experience with Paramount as writer and director and star of A New Leaf, May's next project as director, also a pretty dark and unconventional rom-com, even more so in this case, was 1972's The Heartbreak Kid for 20th Century Fox, starring Charles Grodin, Sybil Shepherd, and Elaine May's daughter, Jeannie Berlin. And like A New Leaf, The Heartbreak Kid was based on a short story, this time A Change of Plan by Bruce J. Friedman. But unlike May's first film, here she was essentially serving as a director for hire on a screenplay written by 4-time Oscar-nominated screenwriter, playwright, and author Neil Simon. The film tells the story of Lenny, played by Charles Grodin, He's a narcissistic young man who basically decides to leave his wife, Lila, played by Jeannie Berlin, May's daughter, during their honeymoon after he meets a younger, what he considers to be prettier and blonder woman named Kelly, played by Sybil Shepherd, on the beach, just by chance. And like A New Leaf, The Heartbreak Kid was a big critical success. It earned Jeannie Berlin an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress, and Eddie Albert, who plays Sybil Shepherd's very disapproving father, an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. And again, while May didn't write the script here, although she reportedly did polish it, uncredited, like A New Leaf, The Heartbreak Kid is an excellent dressing down of male vanity and a very wonderfully twisted take on romantic comedy conventions. And although I do think it maybe doesn't have the same level of verbal wit and physical comedy that we get in A New Leaf, no intended offense to Neil Simon, the script is also brilliant. This film really does cut deep, and it also has one of the best, most hilarious, awkward and sad breakup scenes in film history.
What? I don't understand. What are you trying to tell me? I mean, I'm getting nervous.
I'm trying to say, we have to prepare ourselves. We have to prepare ourselves for anything, you know? I mean, everything could be terrific. The world could be singing. And then suddenly, for no reason at all, it's over. It's over, Lila.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God, Lenny. I think I know what you're trying to tell me.
Look, I didn't want it to happen. I didn't plan it. You're good. You're good. You deserve better than me. You deserve much better than me. I didn't want it to happen. I didn't plan anything like this.
Oh, Lenny. Oh, Lenny. Oh, my God, Lenny. Oh, Lenny, you're dying. Oh, Lenny, you've got something and you never told me. Oh, Lenny.
I'm not dying. Who said anything about dying? I want out of the marriage. I want out of the goddamn marriage.
Oh, and by the way, The Heartbreak Kid was remade in 2007 by the Farrelly brothers with Ben Stiller in the lead. And while the remake wasn't exactly successful, just that these big names in Hollywood comedy would even want to try and remake this film is just a testament to how good Elaine May's original really was.
And then there's Mikey and Nicky, which, if you consider it a comedy, would be one of the darkest comedies that kind of was ever made. The film stars Peter Falk as Mikey and John Cassavetes as Nicky. They play two low-level criminals in Philadelphia. And it opens up with Nicky having a mental breakdown in this really dingy hotel room when he thinks that there's a hit out on him. And having been kicked out of his house by his wife and conceivably having burned every other bridge in his life, he calls on his old friend, Mikey, in pretty panicked desperation. And that call kicks off a night of soul-searching and an exploration of male friendships in general and toxic impulses that really strips away all the artifice of the gangster movie as the two spend the night wandering through the seedy streets and broken down establishments of the city, reflecting on their lives and their shared histories, even breaking into a cemetery at one point to visit the grave of Nicky's mother.
This is foolish. Nick, please. It's just foolish.
Foolish?
Frankly, I think it's ridiculous.
You didn't like my mother?
I loved your mother. I thought she was a wonderful woman.
Why is it ridiculous to visit a grave?
Because it's 1 o'clock in the morning.
It makes it nicer.
Doesn't make it anything, Nick. A grave is a grave. There's not a religion in the world that says a person's soul was buried with them in their grave. It's not your mother in there.
You don't believe in any of that stuff, huh? You don't believe there's anything after you die?
Me personally, no. I believe you die and that's it.
That doesn't scare you. To think that one day you'll die, you'll be over. You won't be anything, you won't know anything, you'll be nothing.
Look, Nick, you want to visit your mother? Let's visit your mother because the conversation is stupid.
It isn't stupid, it's interesting if you're gonna die.
Well, I'm not going to die, so I think it's stupid.
Yeah, well, you are someday.
Look, Nick.
You're gonna die someday.
I'm not going to stand here at 1 o'clock in the morning and discuss what's going to happen to me when I die. I mean, that Michigas I leave to the Catholics.
And Mikey and Nikki was a really personal film for May, decades in the making, with work on what became the script starting as far back as her Compass Players days in the mid-1950s. Like May's professional journey itself, the film was also a rocky trip, an arduous journey, but she wouldn't concede her artistic vision. Also, like her professional journey, not conceding that artistic vision in all of her work. The shoot itself lasted 120 days in total. When after the first were done in Philadelphia, the first 60 days, they had to move it to LA for another 60 days to accommodate Falk's Colombo schedule. In the end, they shot over 1 million feet of film and were definitely butting heads with Paramount on the film's release. And rather than let Paramount take the film from her, famously, Elaine May hid the negatives of the film in her garage, and eventually the film would be released in December 1976. Kind of a small release, but the film's real release was not until 1978 when she, along with Peter Falk and former Paramount executive Julian Schlossberg, bought the movie back from Paramount and released it to a more receptive audience. Mikey and Nikki is just a really amazing film, deserving of its own episode in and of itself, a whole podcast, maybe even a whole podcast series. But luckily, there's a lot online you can find about it, including the film having been released by the Criterion Collection. So getting that disc, of course, has all the extras. And most of those extras, if not all of those extras, I believe, are also on the Criterion channel. So if you want to do a deep dive on that film, and I suggest you do, the project itself is, of course, very interesting, but then the film is a masterpiece. And, one that's sadly underappreciated, but being more recognized today. And hopefully people get a chance to see Mikey and Nikki. Amazing film from Elaine May.
So after Mikey and Nikki, May stayed busy with screenwriting projects, but didn't direct a feature again for another decade. And the film with which she made her comeback, hailed with much pre-release ballyhoo, and featuring two of Hollywood's biggest leading men at the time, was Ishtar. Ishtar is one of the greatest film maudites, or cursed films, in film history, a name that has become synonymous with turkeys and bombs. And the film did, in fact, bomb in 1987, only grossing about $15 million on a $50 million budget. All of this following a lengthy and troubled production. The critics piled on, and bad news traveled fast to sink it. There is a lot to say about this film's place in history, enough for its own podcast episode, and who knows, maybe someday we'll take that on. But for now, I just want to say this. I think Ishtar is wonderful. I'm not saying it's perfect, maybe not even that it's a great film per se. It undeniably has some rough edges and wobbly bits, but it's a truly funny movie, extremely silly, even by comedy standards, yes, but with some interesting ideas and commentary embedded within it. In the leads, Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman deserve high praise for putting themselves out there on a comedic limb in their very goofy double act as the not very talented songwriting duo of Lyle Rogers and Chuck the Hawk Clark. Two men in early middle age who have decided to pursue their dreams no matter what.
Look at that. Simon and Garfunkel's greatest hits. Lyle, Dangerous Business is as good as anything they ever wrote.
You think so?
Sure, the only thing that Simon and Garfunkel or Bruce Springsteen or any of these guys have that we don't have is an agent.
You think so?
Dangerous Business is as good as Bridge Over Troubled Water any day of the week.
There are many scenes in Ishtar with Lyle and Chuck honing their songwriting craft, which include a number of artfully artless lyrical passages written by May, along with the brilliant pop songwriter Paul Williams. all of which the duo are convinced are nothing less than brilliant and deserve to become hits on the par with the other big acts of the day. Their manager, Marty Fried, suggests they perform better-known songs that people want to hear. So we're also treated to their tortured, karaoke-like versions of songs like That's Amore and Strangers in the Night. If you appreciate comedy musical bits, as I do, you may be receptive to this material, as long as you also appreciate excruciating cringe comedy, which, in retrospect, is kind of a staple of Elaine May's work. So maybe Ishtar was never going to work for everybody. I would describe the film's comedic sensibility as more indie than studio standard, which was just one more strike working against it at the time. But if you haven't seen it before, and especially if you haven't seen the director's cut now available on video, give it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how entertaining the film really is. Another aspect of Ishtar that I find fascinating is the way that its Middle East intrigue spy spoof storyline, including a few rudimentary action scenes, is kind of a parody of 80s action filmmaking and jingoistic Reagan-era flag wavers. This may not have played particularly well to audiences in 1987, just 1 year after mega hit Top Gun came out, to pick but one example. But I think it helps make Ishtar a key film about the 1980s in the historical sense. And over time, fans and filmmakers have spoken up on behalf of Ishtar's quality, including people like Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, and Edgar Wright. But at this point in 1987, Ishtar's spectacular failure at the box office served to quash May's directorial prospects, although she continued on and remained busy as a screenwriter and often uncredited script polisher.
And just because Ishtar put Elaine May in directing jail, so to speak, very unjustly convicted, I would say. I'm also Team Ishtar, as Todd knows. As Todd mentioned, it did not spell an end to her Hollywood career. And in fact, her career as a screenwriter, an uncredited go-to script doctor called in to provide everything from just basic notes to extensive rewrites on a wide range of projects, continued on way past the Ishtar fiasco, I'm going to call it. And I think it's worth remembering that May's ambitions post Nichols and May initially did involve writing rather than directing, first as a playwright and then as a screenwriter. And then A New Leaf was May's first feature-length screenplay, and she really went from strength to strength from there on out. She earned an Academy Award nomination for her 1978 screenplay For Heaven Can Wait, shared with Warren Beatty. And then post-Ishtar, she wrote the screenplay for Mike Nichols' 1996, The Birdcage, and then got another Oscar nomination for her screenplay for his 1998 follow-up, Primary Colors. And then beyond her credited work, May is widely thought to have made major contributions as a script doctor to films like Tootsie, Reds, Dangerous Minds, Mike Nichols' Wolf, and possibly, and this is my favorite one, also Labyrinth. But regardless, I think A New Leaf remains a standout in her pretty incredible, when you think about it, filmography, for the way it manages to fuse all of her talents and to strike such a perfect balance between hilarity and irreverence and charm and genuine feeling.
And she has worked on projects since then, even directing an American Masters biography of her late comedy partner, Mike Nichols, in 2016. Most recently, Elaine May made her triumphant return to the stage in Kenneth Lonergan's The Waverly Gallery, starring as Gladys. The play began as an off-Broadway production in 2000 and was revived in 2018, this time on Broadway with May in the lead, and Lucas Hedges, Joan Allen, Michael Cera, and David Cromer in supporting roles. The play was nominated for 2 Tonys, including Best Revival of a Play, which it did not win, and Best Actress in a Play, which May took home in 2019. As someone who doesn't see many plays, I was really hoping to make it to this one, and with that cast and, of course, that playwright. If listeners aren't familiar with Kenneth Lonergan, you might know his film work, most recently Manchester by the Sea. But alas, it was one that got away from me. And the production ended on January 27th, 2019. Although I missed the Waverly Gallery, there's still hope for more Elaine May. And we're all hoping to see that. I know I could speak for both Abby and Todd on that. And her return to directing film was announced just back in November 2019 with the film Crackpot, starring Dakota Johnson. And, that's still just all there is out there, is that one announcement in the trades that came out in November. But, I'm waiting with bated breath for the new Elaine May project, because everything she does is gold as far as I'm concerned.
Well, Ben, just that combination of names right there, Elaine May, Crackpot, and Dakota Johnson, sounds promising. And here's fingers crossed that project comes together in some way or form. But having revisited all of Elaine May's film work in preparation for the podcast here this week, not only A New Leaf, but her other films, it's just been wonderful and a reminder of what a unique talent she is. And it's all out there. So if you're listening and you either have not ever seen any of these films, or you've seen some but not others, what can I say? Give them a look. You'll be very happy that you did. Her films are uniquely fun. It's a unique sensibility. Not only did we revisit them this week, I'm already looking forward to re-watching some of these again fairly soon.
Yeah, and thanks to the podcast, I am now an Elaine May completist, having seen all 4 of her films as director. So I'm quite happy about that, because it's not often you get to say that you're a completist of a director's full body of work, especially not one this famous and renowned. So that's a great thing that came out of this podcast. And also, Ishtar. I mean, I think it was just ahead of its time, really. I think give it a go, because it's ridiculous, but it's wonderful.
Agreed. Ridiculous and wonderful. I think that kind of sums up her whole career. Unfortunately, the ridiculous is sometimes not so good in terms of the way she was treated and the way her projects were received. But I'm glad we were able to talk about the wonderful Elaine May, and that I was able to discover that she eats apples the same way I do, from the bottom, core and all. So I think we're kindred spirits that way.
All right. So that wraps it up for this week's edition of Silver Streams. Thank you all for listening. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope that you see something that you love this week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Silver Streams. Watching an Elaine May movie this weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next week for our 1-year anniversary.
A reminder to our listeners, you can find everything currently available in our virtual screening room on our website at afi.com/silver. And a portion of the proceeds from screening these titles at home goes to support AFI Silver Theater. If you have any feedback or questions, you can email us at silverinfo@afi.com.
You can also get in touch with us or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at AFI Silver Theatre, and on Twitter at AFI Silver.
And music for this episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions. Find more of their work on their website, sessions.blue.
What is it?
I think they're wonderful.
Telling the truth can be dangerous business. Honest and popular don't go hand in hand. If you admit that you can play the accordion, no one will hire you in a rock and roll band. But we can sing.